I have a lot to accomplish, and the Wi-Fi was down in the morning. So let's just hope that everything's going to go well. And now we're going to try something not new, but maybe new to a lot of you. We're going to connect to that QR code and that or that URL, and you're going to be able to follow in the language of choice. So you have the ability to follow auditory. So if you have headphones, you can follow it with auditory, and you can also follow it via your subtitle, translated subtitles in real time. I'm going to open it up onto Q&A, so you can ask me questions. You can ask the audience questions there. We've already tested Yop, just tested it in Dutch, and that was translated there. And I think this is the fundamental part of my talk, because subtitling and translations are very important for people who are visually impaired, auditory impaired, and that's really the talk that I'm going to focus on. So you can still access the URL at the bottom there once I go to slide number 2. So I'm going to speak on programming for accessibility. Who am I? I'm Rory Preddy. Please follow me. I've only got like a few followers just yet. And I'm going to be speaking on really what this picture covers, which is making programming and systems more accessible. The cameraman there is looking at me like, I will kill you if you carry on walking. Making it accessible for everyone. He's learning Python. So as he actually presses the blocks in, it can create a loop, a programming loop using those blocks. And that really sums up this talk. So I am a developer audience evangelist for Microsoft, based here and also in MIA. If you want to come watch me do some awesome demos, we've got a silent lab a little bit later where you put on headphones and it just takes everyone away, and I'm going to be pushing some Angular apps to our local data center and also creating a toxic AI. Because what's bad with a toxic AI? So why this talk? So this is my car pedals. And I eventually successfully worked out how to bolt on the car pedals, create a false floor at the bottom of it. I only failed once. And create a accessible means to drive with my midlife crisis 335i. If you want to know what not to do in a midlife crisis, don't buy a car. Hey, it's a bad idea. Oh, this is actually supposed to be. There we go. Supposed to be talking to us. Let's just test that. Okay. So this should actually now be speaking to us. And so this is really the core of the talk that I'm doing. That a lot of times we look at accessibility as a bolt-on, as kind of like unit testing or washing between your toes. But accessibility doesn't have to be like that. And I know because I've made the world of you tallies accessible to me. This is me speaking at the University of Bloemfontein. Any Bloomies here? No, okay. Sometimes they come out. And this is me trying to get coffee. You know, it's coffee and tequila. You know, it's. I won't do anything but coffee and tequila. And I make a plan. I bolt on things. I make a plan. And this has also been very similar to a lot of people who have accessible needs. So in the beginning of engaging with computers, that was the main mechanism for limited mobility, the sip and puff switch, where you would use your mouth to manipulate a keyboard interaction. And then they created something called the keyless keyboard, which you would rotate it for limited mobility. We've also recently launched the adaptive Xbox controller. I don't know if you saw that. It was a Super Bowl ad that we had, that you kind of just mouse over there and move over for limited ability. For visual impairment, historically, there's been the refreshable Braille keyboard, and also the screen readers. So the two most popular ones is JAWS and NV Access. And I've spent a lot of time trying to get to know these screen readers, because in the beginning, it is a completely different world where you have to navigate through speech only. And having a midlife crisis, I bought a BMI scale. So I actually had some neck surgeries, and I wanted to get rehabilitated. So I bought the scale, and I jumped on, and I entered my height, 4'1", and I entered, 120 centimeters to the non-Brexit people. I don't know what's going on with Brexit right now. And I entered my weight, 65 kilos. And then I sat on the scale, and it had two contacts, and it did stuff, and you could see it was working on a model and everything, and then it stopped, and it said horrible words to me. Like, I think it was trying to say I was close to death. And it was frustrating, because this is a skill, this is a smart device that we're all using, and it occurred to me that the world was moving forward, and I can't bolt on to this new world. There's nothing I could do, because without someone thinking about me, I'm going to be just left behind. And I think that's also a pivotal part of programming for accessibility. It's the knowledge that you don't want to leave anyone behind. And I felt like he's not too sad anymore. He's out of the DC universe. He didn't have a good time. Hey? But, being a Marvel fan, I gave myself a challenge. I was going to actually go and promote and evangelize accessibility. Because if I did that, there's a chance then that I won't have to be left behind, and I could assist others to ensure that they wouldn't be left behind also. So what are we going to talk about today? Looking at the scale, I noticed that there was probably a design process, that some people sat in a meeting at some point and said, okay, we're going to create the scale, and anyone who doesn't fit into it, like JavaScript developers, how do you code JavaScript for only 70% of devices? Yeah, we're pushing it to production. How many devices can this handle? 70%? What happens to the other 30%? No. So we're going to look at inclusive design. And inclusive design is actually a very old concept. And it's used in a lot of the companies that you're familiar with. Google, Microsoft, Apple. It's pivotal to their design process. Once the design happened, then obviously there was a user interface. And we're going to look at website standards, because web really is the entry point to a lot of our digital worlds. And finally, I'm going to show you some heinous things with AI. The fourth industrial revolution is here. We need to understand how to create emotionally aware, accessible AI. In the session I'm going to do later, I'm going to create a toxic AI, and you'll see how easy it is for me to create something that isn't emotionally aware. Inclusive design. This is also called user-centered design. And it defines accessibility as the design of products, services, and environments so that everyone, including people with disability, can fully experience them. I really tried to teach unit testing for years and years and years. And I couldn't get through to the developers because they constantly tried to bolt on the unit testing. And you have to test first. And then they said, but why, Rory? And I said, you want to go home to your family. You want to create that air of ecosystem that you can just leave. Similarly, accessibility promises something that you can go see your family. But it promises a little bit more because it says that if you start to have that different mindset, you'll actually start to look at innovation. So first you do inclusive product and service design. then you can actually conform to the accessibility compliance, and we'll look at some of the laws now, increase in productivity, and finally innovation. And you'll see when we go through some of the design steps what I mean by that. So, disability is not a personal health condition. You don't go to a doctor and you say, I'm not feeling too good, and he says, sorry, you have disability. And I actually showed this presentation to my son, who's also got dwarfism like me. And he said something very interesting. He said to me, Dad, am I disabled? And I said to him, remember that scale? When did you feel disabled? And he said, it's only when I had not been thought of. Because disability is a mismatched human interaction. So I said, do you feel disabled when you're just walking through the street? No, only on the scale. And that's the only time that people acknowledge it. Yeah. So inclusive design steps. We recognize exclusion. You create these persona spectrums that are modeled on what we perceive as a disability or accessibility requirements. Once you do that, you solve for one, extend to many. So let's take our mobile phone. So hold up your mobile phone and dial the numbers 951. With one hand, one-handed, and not that kind of like, that hand. We're talking actually one-handed. 951. So how many of you could dial all of the digits? How many of you could dial 2 of the digits? How many of you could dial 1 of the digits? How many of you could dial none of the digits? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to design a keyboard just for me. But most probably, I would be also created in the same spectrum as an individual who would be limited movement impaired, or like I like to say it, a new parent. Because you have no mobility. And then you learn from diversity. Once you see the new interaction with the systems, you learn from diversity and you adjust it, and then you create that innovation. So let's take our persona spectrums. So we have what I mentioned there, dialing in with your one-handed. But in our persona spectrum, we have someone who's an amputee with one arm. And that's a permanent disability. Then we have a temporary disability, an arm injury. Broken arm, or like we get repetitive strain injuries, hey? Like my right arm from my mouse is just buggered. And I can't tell the physio that, like, what did you do? Did you fall off a horse? No, I used a mouse for like 20 years. And then we've got a new parent, a situational accessibility requirement. So when we look at the numbers, and these are actual numbers from the American federal government, the permanent one is only 26,000. The temporary is 13 million. And the situational is 8 million. So creating that persona spectrum and looking at how to create those silos and those scenarios, instead of just focusing on 26,000, which you can't justify for, it's too expensive, you actually are coding towards 21 million. And all of these persona spectrums are actually freely available on the web. You can get them, you can see how do we create them, but it's also important to understand how you could do this for your own customers. You take the persona spectrum, and this is a web shopping cart scenario, registration, navigation, and checkout. And you superimpose your persona perspectives on top of your user journeys. And you see from then where you can create your innovation. So you've got all the way from site landing to experience, and you superimpose the standard spectrum that we've got there, and you'll see now I need a responsive design. I only have one arm to operate. I need maybe an easy-to-use captcha, which they're getting so hard. Hey? Every time I look at a new captcha, I go, what? A help desk to help people with accessibility requirements. Single sign-on, so they don't have to do this repetitively. Voice search, one-button access, a callback feature if they needed help. SMS and email alerts, and right at the end, instead of a silly little survey, an AI adjustment to say, did this work? Was this person able to engage with our system? And then adjust it. Because one of the things I'm going to show you is that AI is very pivotal to the evolution of your software for your customers. So let's get a little bit techy. Let's look at website accessibility. And I like to actually use a quote from one of our founders. For most of human history, we put our innovative capacity in improving the quantity of life. Because we're living longer, our focus is starting to shift towards improving our quality of life. And there's nothing more important than web-focused. It is the digital gateway to a lot of people's lives. And of course, there's legislation. So that's great, touchy-feely, but the Americans went a little bit ballistic. They created the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act that said that all publicly facing mobile and civil websites have to be accessibility compliant or a fine and or a jail sentence. Of course, the Europeans went like, no, that's out of the pond, we're going to do the same thing, and they created the EU Parliament Directive on Digital Accessibility. The Canadians went, okay, cool, everyone's talking, but no one's fining, so they created their own law that said, for every day that a site is not accessible, we're going to fine you $100,000. Do you remember GDPR? You know, a little standard. Do you remember when it came to South Africa, everyone's like, what just happened? That is going to happen. And to conform to that, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is conform to WCAG 2.1 AA. Did it say WCAG? Okay, what CAG? WCAG. It's cake. So what is WCAG? It was released a long time ago.
We got a long way to go.
1999, it had some requirements. 2.0, more requirements. But suddenly people realized that maybe they should also cater for the millions of people who have cognitive difficulties like ADHD and autism. And they released 2.1. And this was a fundamental change because it broadened the spectrum of accessibility to a wider population. 1 billion people have disabilities right now in the world. Their family heavily invested in that to support them, 2.4 billion. That means nearly half the world has a vested interest in to see that accessibility is driven out. You've got compliance levels. You've got level A, deals with most basic website features, which is what we're doing right now. We're live captioning. If you're live captioning, you're level AA. So at Microsoft, we have a mandatory requirement to caption and live caption all of our videos. And that's also something that we've just taken as a journey for an institution. And then we have AAA, WCAG AAA. This is going one step further by creating rich experiences for people with disabilities. There's not a lot of sites that have this, but it's something to aspire to. The 4 main accessibility principles for WCAG. Perceivable. So the first time I did this talk, it actually translated perceivable to Peppa Pig. No, that's great. It learns as we progress. So it's actually building up a personal lexicon for my own grammar and vocab. Perceivable, can you see it? Visually impairment. Operable, can you use it? So limited mobility. Understandable, can you understand it? And then also robust. It won't break in future technologies. Those are the 4 accessibility principles. So perceivable. One of the core pivotal points of perceivable is creating text-based alternatives for images. Like that's not a cute cat, that's an apex predator. But a lot of the tool sets now make perceivable available via AI. So Microsoft PowerPoint, it scans sad Affleck and sad person. It's built into a lot of the tool sets to allow you to create perceivable, accessible systems. Also with perceivable, color. 1 out of every 12 males is colorblind. And we still use color to convey meaning. On the left there we have, I think it's my left. On the left there we have a red error for an incorrect email address. And then when we look at what a colorblind person looks at, you can't see that. So I'm going to show you with the demo on how to actually cater for colorblindness via the toolsets. Color contrast. So there's quite a lot of standards because this is the normal color contrast. It's kind of readable and it's not offensive compared to this, which is so color contrast also. If you want to cater for people, because this is not only for colorblind people, but it's also to help epileptic people, to stop them from going to an epileptic fit. Okay, this is my boy, Ron Swanson. And you'll know that some of you Parks and Recreational fans know that Ron Swanson never laughs, ever. But the subtitling there was incorrectly done because a lot of people just chuck it into YouTube and just let YouTube do whatever it wants though. Subtitling is pivotal to the perceivable notion of WCAG. And you can, Google does it, Microsoft does it, Apple does it. It's very easy to do subtitling. And we're leveraging more and more in the cloud to do subtitling. Right now, this is going to speak to our data centers, which is processing with hundreds of thousands on computer, learning my nuances, and then sending it back here. Hyperlinks. So this is a good example of a really bad hyperlink. But hyperlinks are very important to be able to navigate with screen readers. So even that click here, if you have a screen reader, it doesn't help. You should have the full name of the hyperlink there and the correct color coding. Like, purple's a horrible hyperlink color. I think we should just all vote to have it thrown out. Stack Overflow. Okay, so it's totally all right if you've built your career on Stack Overflow, because we're going to hand out those keyboards a little bit later, and those are the Stack Overflow keyboards. But keyboard navigation, it's difficult if you try to actually change it. Tab through your site, tab through your application. And then you'll want to actually change the tab index, but don't. Unless you're going to invest in it, don't change the tab index. Because that is the main mechanism that someone will navigate through to your site through tabbing. HTML. So a little bit of coding. I still kind of code a little bit. And this is the normal structure of a good, well-formed HTML site. You've got the heading, you've got the p tags, and you've got the list. Now, to a screen reader, it would be able to read that because it's semantically sound HTML. And we all do semantically sound HTML, right? Or we do like that. We do whatever we need to get it out to our production for our customers. And in there, we got no p tags, we got br tags, and we got what we perceive as a list. So we've already removed 25% of the population's ability to use that site. Understandable. One of my pet projects is to find the worst examples, and Reddit is such a good site of volume sliders. So here's a volume slider where you actually have to pump it down to get to your slider. And here's a volume slider where you have to scream into the volume slider of the noise level that you actually want it to be. And the best, I couldn't even get past gear 2, is one where you have to change the gear level there and understand the clutch and the accelerator to get to the correct. But this is tongue-in-cheek because sometimes we make sites way too difficult. They changed some of the sites of a main corporate company to cater for the visually impaired, and they gained much more engagement with the elderly because they didn't realize that the persona spectrum was the same kind of requirement. Scalable. Okay, so I don't have a sausage dog, I have 2 schnauzers. And they howl every morning, even this morning at 4 o'clock. But most people who have accessible requirements require help on their mobile phone. And we saw there with the WCAG 2.1, one of the requirements was to make your site responsive. Because landscape on a mobile phone, we all cater for landscape, right? But moving it to landscape is a pivotal part of accessibility. So we've looked at the requirements for WCAG. And if you want to go to level AAA or a little bit further, you need something called ARIA. And ARIA means rich applications for accessibility. This really is going to the next step because you're catering for the accessible population and assisting them. And it has role attributes, which we'll go through, live regions, landmark roles, and states and properties. So ARIA is markup. So you can see there that you've got a main tag, and it's the same as normal markup. You've got a state, you can set states, and properties. It's HTML5. So when HTML5 was being created, they looked at what was available in ARIA to actually leverage off the learnings, because ARIA is older than HTML5. So a lot of the HTML5 tags were inherited from ARIA. Semantics. When you have a visual impairment, you have to be very focused on semantics. And remember when HTML4 wasn't really semantically aware, and suddenly now HTML5 is. It's because they looked at ARIA. So if you have a semantically sound HTML site, you're already ARIA compliant, meaning that you're creating rich applications that people can access easier. It's very hard to not buy Lego, hey? They've got a Lego store in Sandton City, and my son and I walked past it, and I was like to my wife, don't show him at all. Just walk straight past it. But the first rule of ARIA and ARIA Lego is no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. If you're just going to knee-jerk and bolt onto the sites with ARIA, don't. Rather leave it alone. Rather create that semantic HTML. The second rule of ARIA, do not use ARIA if existing HTML tags already provide the same functionality. So let's look at also how to do ARIA the right way. A role is a promise. So if you actually press the button there and you go press equals to false, you're setting up the promise of the state. Principle 2, ARIA can both cloak and enhance, creating both power and danger. Here we have an A tag and a hyperlink, but we're setting it as a menu item because we haven't actually treated this seriously. So as a result, anyone who looks at that A tag will see it as a menu item and not be able to read it. The same with the second example there. It has a label, and they can only perceive the contents of the ARIA label, not the linked text. So those 2 rules with ARIA. So we've got a demo. You guys can actually follow online with the DevConf demo. And we're going to look at a site, the standard that the WCAG, the W3 Institute created, called City Lights. So this is our little City Lights site. Like I said before, you can access it at akka.ms/devconf demo on your mobile device. And it gives you an inaccessible and an accessible version of the same site. And you can go through to show annotations, and it'll show you the annotations of the examples. And you can navigate the site, and it navigates. And this is the inaccessible version. And if I click on the accessible version, what do you think will change? Nothing. Because to us, you can achieve the same thing without being accessibility. But to someone who uses a screen reader now, that site has become unusable. So let's look at why. So, Chrome. Let's mention the elephant in the room. Even Microsoft has announced that they're going to use Chrome. The accessibility toolset is built into every single Chrome browser right now. Lighthouse, the same toolsets that you use to test the responsiveness of your site. You can use it to check accessibility. And it's a little click there. I've got the inaccessible generate report. And it'll create a report there pretty quickly. It'll give me a score. I think it's 43%. It'll tell me the background full colors do not have sufficient contrast ratio. It doesn't have a lang attribute for language. They don't have alt attributes. And this is available right now as part of the developer tools that comes with every Chrome browser. So 2 weeks ago, Microsoft released and open sourced their core accessibility toolsets that they've been using to test accessibility on every one of their publicly facing sites. It was nicknamed Keros, and it's called Accessibility Insights for Web. You can test websites, and you can also test Windows applications. So the demo here, I'm going to click on the Chrome add-in, Accessibility Insights for Web. And it comes in two possible tests. You've got fast pass and assessment. Assessment is a fully WCAG 2.0 AA compliant test that you can follow through, and some of it is automated. Fast pass is a quick and meant to find the obvious problems with your site. Now, what's going to happen soon is that they're going to release the dev toolchain to allow you to integrate this into your DevOps. Meaning the same thing that I'm showing you here very soon is going to be released into your DevOps pipeline. So let's run the fast pass here. And it shows us all of the different issues, and we can click through here, color contrast. But a fundamental difference in the toolset is that it actually annotates your page. And you can run this offline also. You can save this somewhere, and it will annotate your page, and you can click through and find out the issue. It'll give you, so this is no alt on an image, and fix one of the following, and you can copy the failure, you can file an issue, and you can link it to your bug tracking there. So this was released 2 weeks ago, which is perfect timing for me. Hey? You also have the ability to use some of the tooling here. So let's switch that off to check color contrast. So let's switch the color off. Headings, landmarks. You can test whether you're doing heading and landmarks. And tabs for navigation. So we're going to switch on the tab for first, and then we're going to try tab through the inaccessible website, which has the incorrect tab index. So we start off on the main heading, and we never leave the menu because we got the indexing incorrect. If we go to the actual accessible site, and we switch on the tab stops, we can see that the accessible site is properly tab focused, and you can screenshot this and send this through to say that you have actually created a navigable website with tabbing. So it's a Chrome add-in. It's called Accessibility Insights for Web. You've got that, and for Windows front end, and look out please soon for the DevOps version that will help you with your build life cycles. So that's a little bit of a demo. This is the w3.org City Lights, and you can access it through that URL that we did. And let's carry on with our demo. AI. I know you all came here for the AI, hey? hair. I've not been kind to AI. I've used it for my nefarious reasons, and I like to show that I'm not related to Peter Dinklage. And it's 0.46, but that's actually very high in AI. I'm not him, and I don't do kids' bodies or bachelorettes. Depends, okay. And I tried to do a session where I had a little Alexa personal assistant, and I created a pass the butter robot based on Rick and Morty. And I sat next to Werner Vogels, and I was chatting to him on the way to Cape Town, and I was telling him about Alexa, because Microsoft actually partners with Alexa, because we realized that accessibility requirements supersedes the personal assistant war that is happening. But I created my little robot, and I remember I had a session at one of the developer user groups, and I was just screaming at this thing, because it couldn't understand me. And it occurred to me that if I was screaming at it, the actual assistant wasn't really accessible. Because accessibility should be unnoticed with AI. So here's another example. These are accessible steps. These are concrete steps. Now they can be used for mobility impaired people, but also with mobility able people. But what if in the future those stairs would adjust according to your requirements? And you can do that with AI. I will show you why. Because of course there's the fail with the legislative requirements. So first, AI is not about a 0 and 1 sentiment. So a lot of people have now started acknowledging that you can make really heinous AI. You can build it on your client model. You can create a bias AI with the wrong spectrum. The guys at MIT acknowledged that, and they created, it's a bit small, but they created an AI based on the persona spectrum. So this is the emotional spectrum. And interestingly here, you can see there that boredom is actually linked to disgust, linked to loathing. Because scientists believe that boredom is an evolutionary trait to stop you from sitting still, because you might have been poisoned. Have you ever seen a child? They'll do anything not to be bored. So if you are bored from this talk, please, we've got paramedics standing outside there. They'll give you some Netflix, and we'll get through this together. So they took the spectrum, they created an artificial emotional intelligence called DeepMoji. In 2013, the American federal government put out an RFP to create an AI that understood sarcasm, because they wanted to scan for threats on social media, and they couldn't, because sarcasm was too hard. So the guys in MIT created DeepMoji. And DeepMoji went and scanned 55 billion tweets in an attempt to understand sentiment. They sanitized it to 1.6 billion. They created these categories, and the categories that I was interested the most is the I'm not impressed face, aka the sarcasm emoji. So you can access the DeepMoji AI right now. You can also download the model, and it's constantly learning. So if you want to go into the website, you can go deepmoji.mit.edu. The first thing that I did when I saw this was I put in the electricity is off again, oh joy. Sarcasm. And it picked it up. Not impressed face, I'll kill someone, angry face, angry face. So we have AIs who understand emotion. What about AIs that understand accessibility? So did you know also that Cortana understands emotions? Okay, so if you scream at Cortana, it will change itself to a different visual cue to say, I understand that you're stressed. Because it's taking that emotion, the emotional flow that you created from that sentiment, and understanding that the individual there wants to engage with you in a different way. So what about creating this for your customers? So any TensorFlow developers here? TensorFlow.js? Playground.tensorflow.org. The ability to actually create machine learning in your browser, just offline in your Chrome browser. And when I saw this first, I thought, I've just joined Microsoft as an Azure developer, and now they're telling me that I don't need the cloud to do this, tell no one, but I can't. Because what someone did was that they took all of these technologies. You can access that demo there. And in the browser, they learnt American Sign Language to cater for people who couldn't speak to Alexa like I couldn't, learning on the browser, offline, with the sign language. So this actually go in that demo there. This actually tracks what you perceive as your sign language, and using a convolutional neural network will learn your nuances so you can speak to Alexa or a digital assistant with American Sign Language, with no server involved. Please come watch my Zero demos afterwards, okay? So we still need a server, okay? So we're in a time with the fourth industrial revolution that AIs can help with accessibility requirement. They can adjust the interfaces dynamically to cater for that. So how do you start? You need to define bias as a spectrum. They had to scan 55 billion tweets because there was no corpus of data that was sufficient to actually learn emotions, and they had to go out there and say, do it for us. But there's bias also. Your clients have bias. You have ethnic bias. You have cultural bias. You need to define bias as a spectrum, just like we did with the mobility impaired person with one arm. You need to enlist your customers to correct the bias. Have a little button there to say, this isn't working for me. Cultivate diversity with privacy and consent. You can't build your model on your customers' data without their consent. Balance intelligence and discovery. And finally, most important, you need to build inclusive AI teams. The reason for that is because when you know what you couldn't do, you can create things like that. The seeingai.com. So that was created at a hackathon, an accessible hackathon, and it can narrate your entire life. If I had it with me, it's only for iPhone. I know Microsoft. But it can actually tell you how many people in a room. It can tell you the colors. It can tell you the barcodes. It can tell you the product labels. And this is one of our main applications that we promote with accessibility requirement. And this was created because our accessibility-aware AI team includes individuals who have accessibility requirements. Happy Affleck. So after this journey, I felt that I had understood on how to promote and to engage. I haven't put the batteries back in that scale. So in conclusion, we're going to have a Q&A in multilinguals. But in conclusion, we've looked at inclusive design. The spectrums are there. The processes are there. We've looked at website standards, but there's also other standards for thick applications. We've got the tooling there that has just been made open source, freely available for you. And finally, we also look at how AI can assist in making your applications accessible. So before we do Q&A, you can rate me, and then my kids can eat. Also, all of the slides there are there. If you don't want to put your details in there, there's a little skip, goes straight to the slides. And I've got a nice WCAG 2.1 cheat sheet, and you can access all of the demo information there. Now we're going to switch on the little accessible Q&A. The swear filter's on, hey? So if you want to connect, please, let's go back to the first slide. The big boy. You can connect to there, and we're going to switch on the unmute audience. We're going to take your questions in any language of your choice. So it supports English, Afrikaans, not necessarily all the African languages, but I have told them they're going to. Chinese simplified, Chinese traditional, all of the major European languages. TV, okay. TV will turn off automatically. Select OK to turn. Do I press OK? OK, I don't know what's going on there. So let's take your TV just switched off. Let's take your questions, or your compliments, or your just OK, maybe compliments. Give you a second there to connect. So it's translate.it/XZIUK. So how did I install this? This is something that comes out of the box installed with PowerPoint. PowerPoint 2019 has subtitles built in, and this is something called Microsoft Translator, which is an add-in for PowerPoint, freely available, that you can plug onto Microsoft PowerPoint 2013 and above. 64 different languages. Okay, so we had a question there. No, we just had ... Ba Bongani. Popping granny. Popping tags. Okay, we give you guys a second. Yes?
Yeah, so I don't have a question. I just want to say it was a really awesome talk.
Thank you.
For the compliments section. No, I really like by seeing what a person does wrong, it really helps to realize what you actually, who you excluding. And a person rarely thinks about that. So
Thank you. And this is also an attempt to make these presentations more accessible. Because I don't know how many of the audience is visually impaired or auditory impaired or cognitively impaired, but we should all make an attempt to make subtitles available.
yeah.
How many is Africa?
There's not a lot of African languages, Swahili, and I've asked the question why, and the problem is that there's a lot of dialects. So there's French, there's Portuguese, there's some of the European languages, but this is pretty important. I spoke to someone who does rural schooling, and she said this is great because she actually schools a lot of people she can't even speak to because their native tongue is so different that she needs to engage. And then I bumped into someone who's at Crawford School, and she said this is awesome. Half her students are Chinese. Did I answer your question?
The one that all presenters hate, not a question, more of a comment. So I've got a visual disability. I've got retinitis pigmentosa, and I'm trying to get my team to realize, think about how I perceive this website when I get a card and I've got a test, and I click a button on the bottom right of the screen, and a please wait spinner pops up in the middle of the screen, but nothing else changes. I don't even see the spinner because I can only see what I'm directly looking at. And in contrast as well, for example, I can't read the times on our DevConf agenda today. Contrast is too bad, and track 3 as well.
So I was asked the same question in Cape Town when I did that, and they said, but wheelchair access is available in most buildings. Aren't we somewhere there? And I think that the fundamental difference is that accessibility was a bolt-on before. And we're getting to the point, like Bill Gates said, that we understand that if we don't cater for that, it's a very small percentage of the population that we're actually catering for, though. 25% of my KPIs are actually around diversity and tech and accessibility. So the entire Microsoft staff is mandated to do that. And we're seeing a change in Google, in Apple, in a lot of these companies where their staff has to actually be accessible. And it's coming.
Yeah. We've got a long way to go, but I think talks like this and people like us speaking out and making people aware.
So Mandla asks, how about tooling? Wait, Mandla, which language did you do this in? Oh, okay. How about tooling? Definitely, website standards. Remember, if you've got semantic HTML, you've got semantic Angular, React, then it should be accessible. And you can test that without having a screen reader by using the accessibility insights for web, clicking on the fast pass, getting the basic of the tooling to tell you whether your site is accessible or not. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'll see you at the silent labs that we have. And if you want to ask me and come talk to me afterwards, thank you very much for your time.